From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, K-State's Romulo Lollato will talk about monitoring the progress of your wheat stands producers to know when to remove grazing cattle to preserve the grain yield potential of the stand, using the first hollow stem stage of development as the main guideline. Romulo will explain how you can sample your fields for that indicator. Then a profile of another Kansas farm couple will be formally inducted into the Kansas Master Farm Homemaker program tomorrow evening here in Manhattan. Today we'll have the story of Richard and Denise Swenson of Cloud County. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Gregg Eyestone will talk about planting those garden potatoes and onions in the days ahead. All that here on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Thanks once more for tuning in. We'll lend attention during this first segment to the winter wheat crop in Kansas, and principally, we'll talk about when to pull cattle off of wheat pasture with intent of taking that wheat to grain. And more on that in just a second, but we'll talk first about the general state of the Kansas winter wheat crop. Joining us is Romulo Lollato, wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension. He's on the road today down at K-State's research fields near Hutchinson. Romulo, what you've heard and what you've seen of late about the condition of Kansas wheat, how would you assess it?
Hi, Eric. Yes, well, thanks for having me on air here today. First, we're here down in Hutch, and we're trying to get quite a bit of the research in our group done out here, and it's a very nice day to do so just before the cold spell that is about to come now on the weekend. So right. We're trying to get as much field work done as we can.
You're moving fast, yeah.
Yeah, and so overall about the condition of the wheat crop, for the most part, whenever we started this crop in the fall, I guess we had a couple of very different scenarios, right? The crop in central Kansas, for the most part, was planted towards that late side of the optimum, mostly because we're seeing many other the summer crops into the rotation, right? So either wheat is mostly going either after corn or after soybeans in this part of the state here. And if we're planting after soybeans, now we're pushing planting dates a little bit to the late side. That can be a very big issue in our yield potential because we're planting late and then we're not having, the crop's not having enough time to tiller in the fall. Now, that was not necessarily the case this year. So running around many of the wheat fields in central Kansas here, really what we see is that because we had a relatively warm winter, the crop was able to tiller through the winter, for most of the winter at least. So this was actually very good news. Right now I'm standing in a field that was planted well into November in soybean stubble, and we're where we want to be. We have about 3 to 4 tillers, and that's in pretty good shape. So for that crop that we are concerned with planting late and having very few tillers, the warm winter kind of make up for that, for the fact that it was planted on the late side. Now, we had the other scenario, which was more in the southwest part of the state, that the crop never really emerged last fall, mostly because of lack of rainfall. And in that part of the state, it's more of a mixed bag. We have some cases where the crop came up in January and is just now going through tiller. We also have some cases of scattered rainfall where the crop came up last fall and is actually in decent shape. So for the most part, I would say that we are in okay shape in the state. There are those fields that never emerged last fall because of the drought in parts of central Kansas and majority of southwest Kansas. Their yield potential has been compromised, but with the moisture and with the warmth, it's coming out now and tillering out.
Good to hear. A long ways to go before harvest time. Much can happen between now and then. We shall monitor it with you. What we want to do mostly today, though, is share some information for those producers who have turned cattle out on winter wheat for grazing over the past few weeks, perhaps a couple of months. The time is nearly here that producers need to take those cattle off wheat if they're planning on harvesting that stand for grain later on. And this all revolves around something called the first hollow stem of wheat plant development. Remind us what that is, Romulo.
Sure. So here in Kansas, we grow winter wheat. And that word winter just tells us the crop has what we call a vernalization requirement. Or in other words, it needs 6 to 8 weeks of temperatures about 48 Fahrenheit or lower, right, to go through that vernalization, meet that cold requirement, and then get into reproductive stage, start to develop the tiny head that right now is in the crown of the plant. So the first hollow stem is when that tiny head is already developed, right? So right now it's quite early in the growing season already, but that tiny head is either already being developed or currently being developed. And first hollow stem is the point when there's about roughly half an inch or a little bit more than half an inch of hollow stem below that head. So in other words, that head starts to being pushed upwards into that plant stem and going upwards towards the soil surface, but it hasn't really reached the soil surface yet. It's about half an inch from the crown level or just now reaching the soil surface. And the reason that's important is if you think that the cattle that are grazing wheat pastures now, they're just eating foliage, right? They're just eating leaves. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to hurt our yields much. That actually long-term research has shown about a 10 to 12% yield penalty from this dual-purpose system. About half of that is because of cattle damage, right? Cattle eating foliage or trampling plants and things along those lines. Now, if we're not managing the timing to remove the cattle from these wheat pastures, now the cattle might start to eat those little developing heads, and that's when we can have very severe yield losses. So again, long-term research has shown that if cattle is grazing the wheat pasture past this point in time that we call first hollow stem, we can see anywhere from 1 all the way to 5% yield loss per day. So think about it. If your cattle is grazing the crop for 5 days past first hollow stem, that might be up to 20-25% yield loss. At that point in time, you might not even remove the cattle anymore and just graze the crop out. So that's why we're always pushing information out during this time of the year. We are here in Atkinson. We're measuring the first hollow stem of about 30 commercial varieties and some lines as well that breeders are developing. And the idea is just to inform growers here, these varieties are already reaching that stage in our research. So it's very important for you to go out and check your own fields and see if it's time for you to remove the cattle or not.
Since you mentioned it, you do post or have been posting regularly information on hollow stem length on those multiple varieties that you are examining down there at Atkinson. That's in the E-Update series, so producers can reference that. There'll be another posting here very soon for producers. But as producers would go out, it's a very simple thing for them to assess. Actually, in another article on this, on the E-Update series, you say that by using a dime, the diameter of the dime can give you an idea of whether that plant has reached first hollow stem. Use that as a measuring stick, if you will.
Exactly. So we can get into, how do we measure that in my own fields, right? And it's important to remember that I'm consistently mentioning here your own fields because first hollow stem will be dependent on variety, but it will also be field specific. So if you planted a given variety on September 15th, and then you planted the same variety on October 15th, they're probably going to reach first hollow stem at very different points in time, right? So it's important to check in each field. Now, when we're checking for a first hollow stem, what we're looking for there is first we need to go to a portion of the field that has not been grazed. An ungrazed portion of the field that's generally just outside the fence or somewhere where the cows can't really reach and graze. And that's important because when cattle are grazing the wheat, the cycle of the crop will be delayed, right? So we need to check for first hollow stem just outside the fence where the cattle cannot graze it, so we're actually looking at the true cycle of that crop. We will just pull a plant. We need the entire plant from even the crown, which is probably going to be underneath the soil surface. And so we would clean that out from any pieces of soil or any clods or anything that would be attached to those roots. And we would cut that plant lengthwise from the bottom up in the main stem, so in the thicker, oldest stem of the plant. Select that stem out of all the tillers and cut it lengthwise, split it lengthwise with a blade or with your pocket knife. That should work quite well. And so if you have a dime on you, you can just see if you have approximately the equivalent of the diameter of a dime in between the crown, which will be in the very bottom of that plant, and the developing head, the little tiny growing head. That's a very good indication that that crop is at first hollow stem, and we probably should be looking into removing the cattle if the objective is to go for both grazing now and grain later down the road.
Very good. As of last week, none of those varieties in your plots had reached first hollow stem, but several days have passed since, so the odds are pretty good that at least some of those varieties have, in fact, reached that stage. So you'll be providing more information on this in tomorrow's e-update, Romulo?
Yeah, so we're actually collecting those samples today. They should be out on tomorrow's e-update for this week, right? And then beginning next week, we're probably going to do it about 2 times a week, because when these varieties start really taking off in the spring growth, they can go quite quick.
In any event, producers, it's something that you need to start tending to quite soon, and that is monitoring your wheat stands and seeing if, in fact, those stands have reached the first hollow stem stage of growth, which is the direct indicator that those cattle need to come off of that wheat pasture, if, in fact, your purpose is to take that wheat to grain. And keep up on the latest information on the first hollow stem ratings for those varieties in the Agronomy e-Update newsletter series at agronomy.ksu.edu. It's updated each Friday. Romulo, we appreciate the word from the field. Thanks, and we'll talk again very soon.
Thank you, Eric.
That's wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato of K-State Research and Extension. Along with us from the South Central Kansas experiment field, K-State operates near Hutchinson. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today, and time now to profile another of the 6 Kansas farm couples who will officially be named on Friday to the 2019 class of Kansas Master Farmers, Master Farm Homemakers. That will take place in ceremonies here in Manhattan. To remind, K-State Research and Extension is a longtime sponsor of this recognition program, along with Kansas Farmer Magazine. The couple you'll hear about today reside in north central Kansas. Upon graduating from Kansas State University in 1971 with an animal science degree in pocket, Richard Swenson first entered agribusiness as a sales representative for a leading livestock feed company and based in Iowa. Soon after, though, the opportunity to transfer back to north central Kansas opened up, and he took it, allowing him to stay involved in his parents' family farming operation just outside of Concordia in Cloud County. Around that same time, he met Denise, and they married in 1977. 2 years later, they took the farm over for good, and over the years grew it into a thriving crop and cattle operation, now spanning 1,000 acres. Swenson Herefords became a highly reputable registered cattle enterprise, and their successes in beef production eventually led the Swensons into taking a big step in the direction of value-added production, purchasing and operating a meat processing plant, through which they now market their finished stock. The Swensons' civic and community activities make for a long, long list. Richard talks here about his yearning to return to the farm, which had been in the family for over a century.
Yeah, I guess I always wanted to come back to the farm. I always wanted to deal with cattle, but, I had no idea when it would happen or what was going to go on, And so Dad came up. I lived in Marysville, and he said, well, I'm going to retire. And oh, my. And so then things changed pretty quick, and got started helping Dad and using his equipment, and rented a little bit of ground. And then we got married. I moved back in April of 77, and we got married in July 77. So then we started from there.
Now, Denise, you grew up in Marshall County, correct?
Right.
And so you met Richard while he was stationed in Marysville?
When he was selling feed in Marysville, we actually met at church volleyball first time. He was with some of his friends, and I was with a church group, and so that's kind of where we met.
Did you grow up on a farm yourself?
No, my grandparents were farmers, and I had cousins that were farmers, and then my dad farmed my grandpa's ground, but I grew up in town.
But you had no reservations about following a farmer, rancher in his dreams?
No, I liked the farm, so I was fine.
So you came back in 77, but prior to that, Richard, you had entered into the feed trade,
right.
Did you not?
Yeah, after I graduated from K-State, I started selling feed and had a little stint by Seneca, and then I got the opportunity to move down to Linden, and it was a lot better territory, and I did fairly well there, calling on farmers, and, you get opportunity, and I thought, well, they wanted me to be a district manager, but I had to go to Osceola, Iowa to do that. So I moved to Osceola, Iowa, and I didn't last very long. I was about there 6-7 months, and back then, I always went to K-State games. I had friends here, everybody, and I couldn't even get a K-State game back then, And so I was in a meeting at Quincy, Illinois with a Mormon, at the time it was Mormon feed, and a guy knew me from, Kansas here. He was at Marysville, and he said, Dick, why don't you come back? And I said, done. He said, I had a territory opened up, so then I sold feed then from there till I moved back to the farm, and then we quit for a little while selling feed, and then we had our first son. We had insurance and stuff, but it wasn't real good, and insurance, health insurance and stuff that I had with Mormons was really good. And
so you took it back up again?
And then I took it back up here. And then I just quit, I think, 4 years ago.
So you put 40 years in?
Yeah, I put 40 years in selling feed.
So, Denise, did you check in with a few farming responsibilities as Richard was out and about?
Well, there were times when I had, probably it's illegal now, but I'd have 3 little boys in the truck with me, or the tractor, and I didn't tell them little kids in town went to the pool every day, but they were in the grain truck with me, and we'd just strap them in, have a cooler, and away we went. But I did a lot of tractor driving and just hooked the doors shut so they couldn't fall out. One was usually here, one was sitting by the radio, and the other one stood and told me what I was supposed to be doing. So we had some good times, and I really hauled the grain for quite a few years until last maybe 6 years. But yeah, I was pretty much the truck driver.
Right.
So.
You raised the 3 kids, both of you, but Denise, once they were out of the nest, you went to extension work,
right.
Correct?
Our youngest, Ben, was, he would have been a sophomore, junior in high school when I went into working for extension. So, yeah, they were just about done. And I did work part-time for Farm Bureau Claims. I had a real estate license for a few years, and so I did some volunteer things and things at the schools and that, so.
Bringing up Herefords and Swenson Herefords, which has been around for decades now. Did you try to grow that side of the operation as you went along?
We've grown some, but we went through some times maybe when we had a production sale. Dad and them had a production sale. Well, then the Simmentals came in, and the Herefords weren't a favor of a lot of people, and so it was hard to sell them, for a time there. then we moved to the black cattle. But we don't sell a lot of cattle, but we sell a few. And it's just something I love. Herefords are very good, for commercial cattle too, and very efficient, very fertile, and they work for us.
Something that you and your family have done in the value-added sense. You've taken the extra step, and not all that long ago, but some years back now, you created Swenson Meat Processing to market some of your stock directly, correct?
Right.
Tell about how that evolved.
Well, it's a long story, but this came up for sale, and we knew the people very well. We had taken cattle in there and had slaughtered, and they went to our own church. We just knew them. And at the time, everything was going pretty good, and we got an opportunity to buy it. And so we usually had sell our steers and stuff, everything just through sale barn. So that changed it, and now we're, finishing some and selling them through that. And our cattle are line bred, so the consistency, they're all the same. And then their carcasses are good. So we thought, well, that would be a way to market our cattle, not sell them through sale barn anymore, and finish them there.
But this speaks to the two of you being willing to think outside of the box and try different things. At least that's what it appears to be.
Well, I never, ever dreamed of owning a locker plant. I never dreamed of anything like that.
That was not in our plan.
Anyway, that was a new step, and then the cattle have worked very well.
Yeah. Well, we want to bring into this conversation community service things that you've been involved with. Also, you've been involved with the American Hereford Association at a very extensive level. We could list all of it. Time doesn't permit. But tying it back to the meat processing, just one example, you work with the local high school, Concordia High, and its FFA program in distributing meat products during the holidays. That's a pretty neat idea.
Well, FFA has been doing that for quite a while with Toby and Sue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that's, we just kind of continued it.
And we've expanded it. I mean, the products, because now there are steaks and pork chops and cheeses that we market through the kids. And the Concordia FFA markets to other schools too.
Yeah.
So
as fundraisers for other FFA chapters around the state.
And there's a lot of summer sausages and different things like that, cheese sticks that we sell through the FFA. And so it works well.
Your children, you have 3 boys, they're all out there in their own careers and succeeding quite well, various levels, various things. Any inclination as to it, if any of them are going to take the farming operation fully over at some point, or is that still in the air?
Yeah, that's our middle son, Kevin. He lives about 4 miles from us, and he helped us lots this last year. And they always come home. If we were going to wean calves or we going to do, the kids came home and helped us. But Kevin has the heart and the want to farm, and so it's getting time.
But it makes you feel good that the next generation is in line to take things over.
Yeah.
Right.
Richard and Denise Swenson of Cloud County. Tomorrow here on the broadcast, you'll hear about the 6th and final Kansas Master Farm Homemaker couple this year, Dick and Karen Works of Allen County. You're listening to Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Now in our 96th year of broadcast service to agriculture, this is the K-State Radio Network, and you're listening to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Moving on now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Leaders from biofuels associations, along with corn and soybean producers, cautioned yesterday that President Trump risks his standing with farmers if his administration does not uphold that federal court ruling on the renewable fuel standard and apply it nationwide. Biofuel and farm groups want the administration to abide by that unanimous ruling last month by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Denver that the EPA has violated the RFS with its carte blanche granting of small refinery exemptions since 2016. Now, rather than let the ruling stand, the Trump administration filed for a 2-week extension with the court. That was granted this past Monday as the administration continues to consider motions for a possible appeal. The groups that brought the case up, tied up in the lawsuit, included the Renewable Fuels Association, National Corn Growers Association, and the American Coalition for Ethanol, among others. Leaders from some of those groups expressed frustration that the Trump administration is considering that appeal, arguing that the president could hurt his standing with farmers if the administration follows through and files that appeal. The USDA's budget was the subject of a House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing this week. Here's a word on that from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue listed several budget highlights in an appearance before a House Appropriations Subcommittee.
Just those standing disaster programs provided $690 million in assistance, and then you all provided another $4.5 for ad hoc disaster and WHIP Plus for 2018 and 2019 losses.
Farmers received payments of roughly $14 billion from the Market Facilitation Program, which was aimed at offsetting trade losses.
We're proud of the new loan program, $79 million to fully support the $8.9 billion demand for farm loans.
Meanwhile, Subcommittee Chair Congressman Sanford Bishop drew his own line.
As in years past, we will not entertain the elimination of programs such as Food for Peace, McGovern Dole, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, Summer EBT, and nearly all of the rural housing loan and grant programs.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, the House Agriculture Committee approved its budget estimates letter to the House Budget Committee, not surprisingly calling for no cuts to U.S. farm and nutrition programs, citing the financial stress in U.S. agriculture and the bipartisan 2018 Farm Bill. The panel said these immediate stresses argue for maintaining funding. Their letter said, quoting here, given the strong support for the work mentioned above and the economic realities facing many Americans, the committee believes that the farm, rural, and nutrition priorities should be maintained and that no budget reductions are warranted in any part of our jurisdiction, as they wrote. The Agriculture Committee will also continue to gather new insight into how to improve programs and authorities, including ways to continue investing taxpayer money wisely, they said. And the FMI Foundation, in partnership with the American Seed Trade Association, the American Farm Bureau Federation, and the Farm Foundation, have released a consumer research study measuring market potential for gene-edited products. The nationwide survey examined U.S. consumer beliefs, awareness, and understanding of gene editing in food and agriculture, and their willingness to pay for gene-edited foods as it pertains to fresh and processed vegetables and meat. Agricultural economists Vincencia Caputo and Valerie Kilders of Michigan State University and Jason Lusk of Purdue University surveyed nearly 5,000 U.S. food shoppers who completed simulated purchasing scenarios. Those respondents chose between products depicted to be organic, non-GMO, bioengineered, conventional, or gene-edited. Now, some of the key takeaways from their research included that more than half of the consumers surveyed have never heard of gene editing. Despite limited awareness of gene editing, most of the consumers still value having the option to buy gene-edited foods. The consumers were more willing to purchase gene-edited foods when they know the specific benefits to the consumer, to the environment, or to animal health. And when consumers are informed of the benefits of gene editing, market potential for gene-edited products exceeded 15%. Interesting study. Next up, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. Here's Gregg Eyestone.
Ed Anderson, Executive Director of the North Central Soybean Research Program, is joining us. And Ed, as we all know, soybean producers really look at programs, and especially for Kansas, but research is also a very important component in all of this as well.
We're very proud of the fact that Kansas soybean farmers, along with a lot of soybean farmers across the Midwest and across the country, realized a long time ago that investing in research for the short term and the long term was going to bring them great value in producing a high-quality, low-cost product that is reliable.
Because that's the ability then to pool those resources and to be aggressive as far as research is concerned.
Soybean challenges and opportunities in production don't start and stop at state lines. And so about 28 years ago, commissions and boards and associations across the Midwest got together and formed the North Central and decided that, as you say, if they pool their financial resources, if they pool their leadership, if they bring the brightest and best researchers from all of the land-grant universities across the Midwest to bear on problems and opportunities for them, they're going to get good things done currently. And for the last several years, this pool of resources has been somewhere in the range of $4 million a year. And then those funds, by these talented researchers at the universities like Kansas State, they're able to leverage those checkoff funds with competitive grants and company private sector contributions. And so it ends up being a much larger investment than just the $4 million.
Can you give an example of some of the current research that's going on right now?
One project that I'd like to highlight in particular that Kansas and others are very interested in is the soybean gall midge. And this is an insect pest that is really emerging as a potentially devastating problem. When we first started seeing the problem significantly a couple of years ago, farmers from Kansas and other members of the North Central Soybean Research Program got together and said, you know what, we need to address this. So they contract funded a number of researchers, entomologists in the area, and there's tremendous progress being made.
Not only do you have funding from the Kansas Soybean Commission, you have a Kansan who's been a longtime member of your board.
Ron Oldie serves on the Kansas Commission and has represented Kansas quite well on the North Central Board for a number of years. And Ron brings a respect for research. He brings a broad understanding of the soybean industry, certainly his own operation and the soybean production operation of many in the state.
That is Ed Anderson, Executive Director of the North Central Soybean Research Program, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. And this is Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Up now on Agriculture Today, our weekly time to look at horticultural topics. And joining us for this go-round is Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent Gregg Eyestone. Greg, it is that time for vegetable gardening once again in Kansas. And we want to concentrate on 2 early vegetables that are planted out there. Potatoes and onions. And as far as those spuds go, that time is nigh, right?
Yeah, I think most of Kansas will probably go with a calendar of St. Patrick's Day or March 17th as a good time to start at least thinking or preparing for your potatoes. So those are stems that we actually plant in the ground, and you buy your seed potatoes, preferably. It's going to have a blue label to be a certified seed potato. And those come in all different sizes, and so you may want to prepare them prior to your planting. We can take the larger tuber pieces, cut it up into, they say, ounce and a half to 2 ounces. I kind of visualize that as kind of ping pong ball size. And you're going to have an eye in no matter how you cut a potato, so you'll have a growing point, so you don't have to worry about that. But cut those into sizes that are suitable and let that seal over for a few days. The warmer it is, the more humid it is, the quicker that takes place. But simply, if you do it maybe a week ahead of time, you're good to go.
And you can cut those up in the appropriate size and just lay them flat on a surface somewhere out of the elements, of course, but where they can cure.
Yeah, typically, if you're cutting them into a bucket or a pail or something like that, and have a little bit of humidity so those seal over fairly well. And so fairly easy process, but it is an important step that you don't just cut your potato, throw it in the ground, because you have the potential, most likely it'll go ahead and rot and not perform how you want it.
Now let's talk of planting technique. The spacing is important as well as the depth, right?
Yes, spacing, just probably 12 inches is good between plants, maybe 3 feet between the rows if you're doing several rows. You can fudge on that, but that's kind of a idea to think about. Planting, different people do it different ways. So the seed piece that you plant will send up the stem from that eye, and from that stem will form the tubers over time. And so you're going to have to plant that so that you'll be able to provide a tuber-forming area. Typically hilling is what it's called, so you have some loose soil that you mound up around that stem as it continues to develop. So you may plant that seed piece 1, 2 inches, 3 inches in the ground. It kind of depends on your growing technique. And the interesting thing about that is it'll lay dormant for probably a good month, 30 days. You won't know that anything's happening.
Don't panic.
Yes, it takes a while. And then eventually you'll start to see some leaf tissue forming and the stem starting to elongate and things are going forward. And oftentimes in there you may have a frost, and so that will burn back that new foliage, but the seed piece is still alive and will continue to shoot up new growth, and you'll be okay.
But again, you want to build that hill, that mound, ridge that soil up so there will be space for those tubers to grow on that stem.
That's right. So you do need to have an area that you have the capability of scooping up the soil, hilling it up, raking it up onto the stem. You can always bring in some material, compost, straw, those things, but to get good tuber formation, you're going to mound material up around that stem as it grows. Usually about 6 inches. Once it's up, then you start healing some soil up to it, and then that mound usually ends up about 10 to 12 inches deep, if you will, as the progression of the plant is.
And, Greg, does one need to fertilize seed potatoes upon planting them?
It's always good to do a soil test to determine what your soil lacks before you do any kind of planting. But during the growing period, a little bit of nitrogen would be good as that foliage tissue develops. That nitrogen really goes to nice green healthy tissue, which forms the food capacity for the plant to make the tubers.
So you could hold off until emergence before applying fertilizer?
Yeah, I would fertilize while it's growing. So, yes, you got a couple of weeks. So it takes a month or so for it to form, and then probably another month before I'd worry about fertilizing.
Let's shift over now to our other topic today, and that would be growing onions from many in a bundle, normally.
So onions, what you consume there is the leaf tissue, and so to develop good leaf tissue requires some nitrogen. We've talked about that for potatoes, but this is maybe more important for the onion plant. The root system of onions aren't very sparse. They are sparse, or they're not going to go deep into the soil, and so there's not a lot of capacity there to get the nutrients. So on onions, a little bit different than most of our vegetable recommendations is you water frequently and you fertilize fairly frequently. So typically, for the home gardener, you're going to put a little fertilizer in your watering and water them that way. Maybe every other watering, something like that. It doesn't take a lot, but of course a little bit will benefit the growth. Cool season vegetables do best because it's cool weather, and if we get into a situation where the weather gets warm, your spring crop's just not as good as when the weather's cool. But for onions, if we can get them established quickly and get them some water and fertilizer and get that leaf tissue developing, then you're going to have a nice larger bulb in the end.
And you want to space those little plants appropriately at the outset.
That's true. Some people use a theory of planting a little bit closer and thinning and using them as the green onions. The plants will work for that as well, but you do need to remember to space those out. So depending on your size of your end product, your bulb, if you're thinking they're going to get 3 or 4 inches in diameter, you're going to need to space them out appropriately. Because, again, those root systems just aren't aggressive enough to get water nutrients, so you need to have it available to them.
And on that point, and just as a final thought on planting onions, this may apply a little later on as those get established, but weed control is pretty critical to onion success.
That's true. So they have that sparse root system. So if you're doing any kind of cultivation, you may be damaging some of the roots of your onions as well. So typically you may have to do a little more hand thinning or pulling of the weeds that way. Onions, we have long day, short day, and intermediate day onions. And so typically we grow kind of the intermediate day onions. Candy's a good variety, but they're fun to grow, pretty easy to do as long as you're giving that water and nutrients.
Very well. Well, we're off and going quite soon now, in a matter of days, with the vegetable gardening season in Kansas. As we go, we'd remind you that one of the great sources of information is that Kansas Garden Guide out of K-State, and you can find that online or through your local extension office. Gregg, always good to have you by.
Thank you. I'm glad spring's here.
Yes, indeed. And Gregg Eyestone's been with us. He's the Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent, offering those guidelines on getting those garden potatoes and onions started in a proper fashion on this week's horticulture segment. And that closes out today's edition. Thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.